Hi everybody, welcome to our Fourth Universalist service video. My name is Reverend Skylar Vogel. I use he, him pronouns. I'm so glad to be with you for this service and to share some words with you. What follows are the selections from our service on May 8th, 2022. You will see a reading, you will see my message, and then you will see a lively discussion between myself and our Director of Religious Education, Ember Kelly. If you like what you see, please feel free to give a comment, to like, to share. We'd love to engage with you on the various many ways that our videos and our audio are offered, whether it's on our website, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, or your favorite podcast streaming sites. Finally, we acknowledge that our physical congregation here in New York City is located on the Muncie Lenape land. This acknowledgement is part of our work, the ongoing work of fighting legacies of oppression, both current and past. We invite you to join us in this work at Fourth Universalist as we embrace the 8th UU principles. Friends, thank you again for watching. We hope you enjoy.
This morning's reading is by the American poet Mary Oliver. If you suddenly and unexpectedly feel joy, don't hesitate. Give in to it. There are plenty of lives and whole towns destroyed or about to be. We are not wise and not very often kind, and much can never be redeemed. Still, life has some possibility left to it. Perhaps this is its way of fighting back, that sometimes something happens better than all the riches or powers in the world. It could be anything, but very likely you notice it in the instant when love begins. Anyway, that's often the case. Anyway, whatever it is, don't be afraid of its plenty. Joy is not made to be a crumb.
One year, over the winter holidays during college, I took a job as a playground supervisor. The assignment was simple: keep the kids from hurting each other and themselves. Do that while enforcing a dizzying array of rules for which there was no rule book. Adult common sense would make it clear, I was told. No playing on the hill over there, it was too steep. No crossing this line if you were under 8. No climbing on the fence, you might fall and break something. And of course, no shoving, no tackling, no fighting, no generally being a jerk. Now, the other supervisors who patrolled the pavement and playground were a grizzled lot. Their countenance suggested they were veterans of many an attempted hill climb and thwarted shove. But their toughness was subtly tempered by a clear fondness for the children whose safety they oversaw, as well as a fairness that engendered respect and obedience. Most children, I found, when they pushed into the lengthy list of unstated rules, usually doing so intentionally, responded quickly and immediately to what we called redirection. We redirected them away from the fence or the hill. We broke up playful wrestling matches between friends, but also intervened in real spats, de-escalating arguments, brokering peace treaties, and tending to the complex emotional landscape of childhood. This included everything from the heartache of being betrayed by friends, the pain of being excluded from a game, or the shame of being made fun of, the clothes you wore, how you walked, or just being different. Playground supervisors wiped away a lot of tears. This was our work: enforcer, protector, counselor, mediator, friend. I was only working for a week, however, before it became clear that something was bothering the other playground supervisors. They were unsettled by something. I learned it was because of Devin. Now, Devin was a fourth grader. Devin was a new kid. He had recently moved from out of state, joining his class midway through the year. The school was small enough that he was immediately known by everyone in his grade, and the impression that he was making was not a good one. Devin was out of control. He was constantly in fights, in the classroom, on the playground, with kids in his class and kids he didn't even know. He was small for his age, not able to effectively intimidate his own classmates, but still able to aggravate them into conflicts. When they predictably avoided and excluded him, he lashed out resentfully, further deepening his isolation. On the playground, he seemed to bounce from one conflict to another conflict, always in motion, always angry, like a pinball that explodes whatever it hits. The playground supervisors, steady and practiced as they were, found that Devin did not respond to redirection. Preventing a spat in one corner of the playground, they would soon find him in another, initiating another spat. Tell him to get off the hill over there, and he would be back at that same hill a few minutes later, defiant. We had to have one eye on Devin and another eye on everybody else. Visits to detention or the principal's office seemed to make no difference. He was already visiting the school counselor, already enrolled in special education with an IEP. It got so bad that I, too, was summoned to the principal's office. I was aware that I was probably the weak link of the supervisor team, novice that I was. Was I going to get blamed for Devin's delinquency? Fortunately, I was not. But I had a new assignment, I was told. It seemed they had decided that Devin had gone on long enough. The situation, a new strategy was needed. I was to become his personal playground supervisor. I was to follow him around throughout recess 3 times a day, to be his shadow, as they called it, and make sure he didn't get into any more trouble. So I did. The next day, instead of supervising and surveying my normal area corner of the playground, I found Devin in the recess line, and we went off together. That first day was rough. Redirection after redirection, pulling him away as he swung at a group of kids, using my body as a blockade between him and his enemies, him yelling at me, cursing at me for my obstruction. But I also saw the kind of life Devin was leading. I saw how his brittleness and erraticness led to painful rejection after painful rejection. I saw how quickly he took offense for small, sometimes imagined slights. How he seemed to escalate conflict to protect himself and how his self-righteous anger erupted not from cruelty, but resentment. I also saw, though, how he continued to always gravitate towards other kids, how he seemed like he wanted to play with others, but struggled to manage the inevitable disappointments and disagreements that would arise when people interacted. I saw that he was isolated and he was lonely as a new kid, but how he was stuck in this spiral of lashing out and alienating everyone he seemed to encounter. When he had a negative experience, and it was often on those playground days, I tried my best to talk with him, ask him what he was thinking and feeling, about what made him frustrated, and what he thought made the other kids respond like they did. We had a lot of those conversations. And after a few weeks, I started to notice a little change with Devin. He seemed to throw himself less into conflicts, like an erratic, chaotic pinball. He seemed happier to be able to play by himself. Less explosive, less needy. I would dutifully follow him along still where he went, and he would tell me what he was doing, what he was thinking, share whatever he had on his mind. I asked him in turn about his favorite things, about what it was like being in a new place, a new school, how his day was going, how class was going. Now, I had no real experience with children. I had zero training in child psychology or counseling. I admit that I felt really awkward almost all the time when I was with him. And I'm sure that really any other staff person at that school would be more qualified and better at doing what I had been asked to do. Devin did not seem to notice, and I was grateful for that. What I was becoming to him was a friend, someone who was there for him, who cared about him, who looked forward to seeing him and let him know that, who he could count on no matter what awful thing happened that morning or yesterday or earlier that week, or even at recess with him. I still redirected him multiple times at playground, but I did so with him knowing that I would not make him feel small or unimportant, or that he had to risk knowing that I would reject him for something that he did. He was stuck with me, and that was a reassurance. I was not going anywhere. Our relationship became a grounding rod, a safe haven, a place of refuge in all the storm that he was experiencing. A place where all those negative feelings and all that pain and rejection, anger could both live, but then also dissipate, because he knew he was safe and didn't have to respond. There he could feel big enough and valued enough. He didn't need to put others down or attack. Devin and I were only together for about a month. As I prepared to leave, he was no longer picking fights on the playground and in his classroom. His parents reported that he was happier at home and actually doing his homework. He was starting to change. I do not and cannot take credit for his transformation. This is not a story about me, but about him and how kindness and compassion and love can change the life of a troubled person. I think back to Devin and this memory often, especially recently in the last few years, because there's been a certain cynicism I have found growing within me. It's a cynicism that suggests that the world is only a mean and cruel place. A cynicism that says that people who hurt others will be unrepentant always, that people do not wish to change and won't change, and that redemption is so rare unless it is forced and pressured or punishment is threatened. The cynicism that says that the forces of anger and hate and meanness are so thriving in this world and in the hearts of so many people, and those forces of decency and kindness and love that oppose them are weak and pathetic and powerless in the face of them. Cynicism that says that people who are like Devin stay mean and hurtful, and that their better qualities stay silenced and repressed. Now, there are the usual platitudes that we sometimes trot out, that we use to push back against this cynicism. But to me, they often feel shallow. Phrases like love conquers all, or goodness wins in the end. We tell ourselves, but they ring hollow so often. Hollow in a world full of war, in a world where our democracy is denigrated day by day, in a world that has constantly lies that lead to power and yet are still believed. A world that destroys the rights of one's sovereignty over their own body. When I feel cynical, I think back to Devin, and I remember. I remember that even though there are so many reasons to despair, so many reasons to believe that people cannot change and won't change and refuse to change, so many reasons to believe that goodness won't win out or can't win out, that sometimes still it does. Sometimes a little kindness makes the world of difference. Sometimes a simple friendship can truly transform a person's life. Sometimes things really will be okay if we are just good to one another and trust the goodness in each other's hearts. I hope that each one of you who's had an experience like a Devin in your life, moments and people when despite your greatest cynicism, love wins out, kindness changed everything. I want you to hold on to those moments, to remember them, and keep them tucked away in part of your mind and your heart that you can return to when that cynicism hits you so hard that you don't think that goodness has power, that love has power, that you can have that spark of hope again when you need it most. Now, I can't stand up here today and tell you that I know what Devin's life turned out to be. I know that when I left that school, they didn't assign another personal playground supervisor for him because they believed that he was a changed boy. I know he had started to make other friends by then, starting to show that he could roll with the emotional complexities of childhood, managing conflict and expressing his feelings without exploding. I imagine that he still had bad days and regressed and needed redirection. But even though I don't know what he's doing now, I'd like to think that that part of him that started to emerge, that thoughtful and sensitive and kind child, that part of him won out. That it is the part of him who is him today. Devin, wherever he is, would be 27 today. Maybe he has kids of his own. Maybe he's out there starting a career, wondering what life has to offer, what gifts he has to give. Maybe he's still bouncing around like a pinball, but maybe not exploding every time he hits something. I just hope that wherever he is out there somewhere, that he knows that he is cared about and loved. I hope that he has been able to reconcile that part of him that was mean and hostile with that part of him that yearned for friendship and human connection and kindness, that he continued to learn and grow and care. I hope this for every one of us who has these two parts of ourselves in us, no matter who we are. These hopes are what faith is, I think. Choosing to believe in love and goodness beyond so many reasons for cynicism. Choosing to believe that simple kindness can change a life, and that no heart is too damaged to be transformed. I remember that when I remember Devon. May we all do the same for ourselves and those in our lives. May we keep that hope close. Amen.
Hi everyone, it's so good to be with you. My name is Ember Kelly. I'm the Director of Religious Education here at Fourth Universalist. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm so excited, Reverend Schuyler, to get to sit down with you. It's been a few weeks. I had a trip. I had a COVID positivity. It's been a journey, and it's good to get to sit down with you once again and get to chat.
It is. I've missed these conversations, and I'm glad you're back and that you are on the recovery. I know that getting COVID not at home is a tough thing, and having to kind of figure out how to get back and feel better. So I'm glad you're on the mend, and I'm glad to be back with you here.
So this message, I feel like a lot of people, when they have a Mother's Day Sunday at a church, expect a very stereotypical, here's a message about mothers. It's kind of the normal format for Mother's Day at a church. So what was the inspiration for the slightly different take on a message today?
Well, I have preached on Mother's Day, I think, every year that I've been at Fourth Universalist in various forms. I've talked about mothering, I've talked about the divine feminine, I've talked about my own mother and her impact on me. But, one of the things I heard this year was that both from members of our congregation the week before, but also in our staff meeting, Ember, as you know, you were there, that there was kind of a feeling that people didn't really want to hear about mothers as much this year, or it felt like it felt kind of weird that Mother's Day is always about mothers and about mothering, and Father's Day is sort of not about those things. No, I'm actually gone usually during Father's Day. I'm on my summer leave at that point. So I don't get the chance to preach on Father's Day very often. I don't think I may have done it once during my time here. But I was listening to those things, and and part of what I was hearing was that from mothers that there's sort of a feeling of, I think, objectification, a feeling of sort of dwelling in motherhood and sort of diminishing women to motherhood on Mother's Day, and that they would be happy to not have that happen on Mother's Day. The other option was to talk about, I think, sort of the landmark news event of the week, which is the impending repeal of Roe versus Wade. But in talking to a number of other mothers as well about that possibility, there was a feeling that would potentially stir up a lot of difficult feelings on Mother's Day specifically as well. So I will probably save that sermon, that message for another time, simply because the issue of abortion paired with motherhood is just really, it's a very challenging topic, and it stirs up a lot of really complicated feelings for a lot of people. And so I wanted to respect that as well, and if not focus specifically on mothers on Mother's Day, at least not be in a position of making it a more difficult day. Because for a lot of people, it is a difficult day. People who have a hard time with their relationship with their mothers, who maybe wish they could be mothers for a variety of reasons, or are really struggling to be mothers themselves. There's just so many reasons why Mother's Day can be hard, in addition to being a lovely day for people who want to celebrate it. And so I'm sure we'll have more Mother's Day, sort of more stereotypical Mother's Day services in the future, but this year I wanted to set that aside and then do something a little different. So the reflection, as you have all heard, listening to it or watching it, wasn't, I think, so philosophically incongruent with Mother's Day. This idea of kindness and love and how we find hope in those sort of relationships, and to the enduring quality that love and kindness can offer. I do think there are many ways that we can mother. In some ways, the playground supervisors I talked about are mothering in their own way, whether they are male or female identified or non-agendered. There's a lot of ways that we embody the qualities of motherhood, no matter who we are. But I didn't want to. But I felt like that was a way to speak in some ways to the spirit of what parenting was and is, without going at it super directly.
No, I thought that, talking about love, talking about this caring for others, talking about, it still had those same sort of qualities. And it really is fascinating, like you said, this kind of divide in the way that we both celebrate and even talk about Mother's Day. I think one of the things that I observed in our conversation that we had about the topic for this weekend is that, when it comes to Mother's Day, we do have this we have this more nuanced discussion where we are talking about this is complicated for people. Lots of people don't have good relationships. And then you get to Father's Day and you generally see the same kind of conversation disappear. It's just, happy Father's Day. Go enjoy some football or something,
Football isn't on in June, Ember.
Okay, go enjoy some, is it baseball? Okay. See, I'm a little bit out of the loop on sports these days. So, but, so I think, that it is interesting to me. And you pointed out there, how it's such different ways it's being addressed. And oftentimes that happens in the churches too. So, but I really, I enjoyed this message and thinking about how the way that we care about people can really impact their lives, can make a difference. So much of activism, we like to think that we all want to be like the Martin Luther King, the Gandhi. We want to be the big figurehead figure. At least I think a lot of activists do. But a lot of the real work of activism and of changing the world comes from these one-on-one connections that you make that can help somebody. That's such a key thing in creating a positive change in the world.
That's right, and it's much more subtle and it's less dramatic. But it's really part of the work. I think both of us identify in some way as sort of minister organizers, and I think those relationships are really what matter. Relationships of trust. You and I are going to a religious socialism gathering tomorrow night, and a lot of it's going to be relationship building. And I think part of the beauty of it is going to be that it's going to be a space where people who are unapologetically left and clergy are able to connect with each other, and they're from all 5 boroughs. People are from diverse backgrounds and religious traditions, and it should be a really wonderful thing. But we can't move together as people of faith or people of conscience unless we trust each other, unless we know each other, right? And so those kind of relationships really matter. And there's a lot of reasons, and they also sustain us when things get rough. I think part of what we're seeing with this week of the Roe versus Wade repeal, it's just people are feeling really angry and also really dispirited. And I've seen these memes about Mother's Day. I think maybe it was a New Yorker cartoon that's all I want for Mother's Day is for 50 years of my activism to not be wiped away in one pen stroke, right? And it's very dispiriting, but we are able to go forward with each other, and that is a great gift.
Right. It's definitely been a week of complicated feelings for me as somebody who grew up evangelical, and very much part of that pro-life. I've switched to more anti-choicer language recently, but knowing that this has been something that they've been obsessed about for as long as I've been alive. This was talked about in church. We got to get the Supreme Court stacked. We got to overturn this, and then we can start making the Christian nation we need. And so it's definitely been a complicated week of feelings for me around that, knowing that. But I think about the fact that it was getting out of that right wing echo chamber and having relationships with people that really helped me like, I was discussing it with a few of my friends, and I was just saying, like, guys, like, it's usually not something you can just like debate somebody into changing their mind on. Like, this took me years of deprogramming to escape that way of thinking that impacts you. That it's rough, but it takes that relationship building.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. How was it being? I know you were back home in the Midwest with family this week. How was that? Did you have conversations with folks there?
A little bit. The whole being isolated because of COVID meant slightly less conversations. Um, but I mean, it was really interesting. Not related to that my son was watching some science documentaries and talking about things that he learned about, like how if Mercury went out of loop, that it would cause the Earth to like destabilize. And he was so fascinated by the science of all this. And my mother spent lots of time talking about religious counterpoints in creationism, and it was, yeah. So it was 2 weeks of complicated feelings about religion and science. Yeah, it's complicated stuff. I'm curious, to get back to the message though, was there anything that you, besides like your own personal experiences, because obviously that's a good portion of the message is telling a story of this young kid, was there other resources that you drew from as you thought about this? Any books on like the topic that kind of inspire you?
I did do some deeper research that didn't make it into the sermon around the origins of the phrase "love conquers all," and it comes out of Virgil, who was a Roman writer, and the phrase actually is part of a story where someone uses love to such an extreme that it actually destroys him, and it's almost a warning to the all consuming power of love, where he loves this woman. The character loves this woman so much that he basically, and then she rejects him and doesn't want anything to do with him, but he's so overwhelmed by love, and his whole life is so upset. He's so obsessed by this love of this woman that he ends up dying, and so the phrase itself really does not mean what we usually use it to mean, which is part of the interesting thing about it, right? Is that like we use it as a platitude, but it really was not intended as a platitude at all, but actually as a warning. And it's about romantic love specifically, generally, right? Not the love in the Roman text could be also translated to the god of love, by Cupid or Amor or something, and that that god is sort of powerful above all others. And that didn't really make it in because it felt like a diversion as I started writing it. But I was interested in that idea and how like our society chooses phrases to make into platitudes to reassure ourselves when things get difficult or we need that reassurance. And yet they were never intended to be used in that way. They're actually it's much more sophisticated critique. And so I thought that was interesting. I didn't end up using it, but I think it does speak to the nuancing of these platitudes that we wrestle with, right? That I don't think we can say that love conquers all in the way that we mean it mostly in these days, right? That love in the general sense, not romantic love, but love in general will win all. I think that is a faith statement, that is a hope statement, but it is not, I think, empirically true. I think there's just so many counterexamples to that. And that is part of what we do as a faith community, is live into our hopes for the world, and believe that by living into them, we can kind of make them into some form of reality.
Right. That has me thinking about, I feel like there's been some conversation recently around, I think the term is like toxic positivity, like the where you're so relentlessly optimistic and positive that you just like refuse to admit that there might be challenges, where you refuse to admit that people might have complicated feelings, that it's always just, if you're positive, then everything will be perfect in the way you want it. You got to be positive so that it manifests itself, to the point that you forget the fact that we're living in this very real and very complicated world. And we do like to take these platitudes and turn them into things that they're not. And I mean, the thing about the relationships, like the one that you talk about in the message, is that it was complicated. That it took work, for you to get to know this kid and to get to understand each other, and for him to see you as someone that cared about him. It's complicated work. It's not just like come in and be like, okay, young kid, let's be positive. It's complicated, hard work, but it's worth it.
But you can't force it. You can't force it. And like I'm sure there's 100 other kids that us palling around the playground would have not had that same result. But in that one time, it did. I hope that it was long lasting. I don't know. I haven't been able to follow his life, but I do think this idea of toxic positivity is real, and I think our faith tradition, Unitarian Universalism, and I think liberal religion in general, is especially in danger of falling into that trap, because our theological foundation was grounded in the Enlightenment. It's grounded on this sort of hope for a future, and it's very difficult psychologically and emotionally to believe in the power of change and the potential of a better world without having some feeling that is being realized as in that moment. Because then if you don't have that, it feels a lot of cognitive dissonance and emotional dissonance. And so we're very vulnerable to that. And I think that's why we're so surprised when like Donald Trump was elected, because how could this be, right? We are moving in this direction. There's like a foundational belief we have in human goodness and human progress and learning, and the power of like science and deeper understanding of the world will lead us to this direction. And in some ways that is an ideological belief that we have chosen to carry with us and ground ourselves in. But I think it's a challenging, troublesome belief that is not inherently untrue, but is also not inherently false or inherently true either. There's lots of examples of society and human beings falling apart after a period of progress, and we've been able to see, I think, through scientific advancement and the expanding rights in many areas of our society, a progressive line. But that just because that happens in this moment, I'm sure the Romans and the Greeks thought that they were going to go forever as well, and then things started to crack and fall apart, and then we had the Middle Ages for 1,000 years, which wasn't actually as terrible as people think it is historically. But these mindsets that we get trapped in are not always true, and there are definitely periods of decline and problems. So we don't know. Who knows? Future will tell. But I think we should protect ourselves from those overly optimistic views, because we're not free from history and we're not free from human nature. And never will be.
I'm going to practice self-control and decide not to take this into a 30-minute discussion of the Bronze Age collapse amongst two history nerds.
Poor Bronze Age folks. They were doing so well until they weren't.
But I will resist our inner urge to be history nerds. In another world, Reverend Schuyler and I run a secret history podcast. Maybe that's what we should be doing on the side. But Reverend Schuyler, it was so good to get to sit down with you once again, and thank you for this great message today.
Thank you, Ember, and thank you everyone for watching and listening.